Welcome to another edition of the Map to Adobe Lightroom Classic. We're going to explore today in this video the effects panel. So in the Develop module, the right-hand side near the bottom, there is the effects panel. It has two components to it. The two components are vignetting and grain. Vignetting and grain. So we'll start with the top one, vignetting. It's pretty easy to use this slider. It's relatively limited controls, but it does some cool stuff. What vignetting does, it was originally designed to correct lens defects. Lenses are often a little darker in the corners, so vignetting was designed to offset it, to correct it, to make it brighter in the corners. I use it though as a creative tool. I like a little bit of the darker corners. I like photos with a little bit darker corners because it creates a little bit of spotlight in the middle. By making the corners darker, you're helping the eye stay more in the middle area of the photo and to stay with the point that you want the eye to stay attention to. So let's walk through how these controls work. If you take the amount slider all the way to the left, the corners will get darker. If you take the amount slider all the way to the right, they'll get brighter. I personally don't like this look, the white vignette. It's good when you go to the fair and you get your photo taken in the old-fashioned photo booth, but other than that, I don't particularly care for that look, but that's one person's opinion. So generally what I do is I take the amount slider and I make the corners darker, again creating that little bit of a spotlight in the middle of the image. And what I'll do there is go anywhere from my mounts I generally tend to use are somewhere between -10 and -30. It depends on how dark the corners already are, what the photo needs. It just all depends. So that's my general setting. But let's continue talking about how the tool works. So I'm going to take the amount all the way to -100. The midpoint, how close to the center is it? So if I go to 0, it's closer to the center. If I go to 100, it moves it farther to the corners. I usually leave that at 0, but you can experiment and see if you want a more dramatic vignette. You can move the midpoint to the left. Roundness is square versus round on this. So I'm going to take my midpoint all the way to the middle so you can see this. If I go to roundness 0, then I've basically got a square. Roundness at 100 is more circular, so I've got a big circle spot in the middle. And if I go here, it's more a rectangle. The feather is the soft edge of the vignette. So if I take the feather to 0, now I've got a picture frame. If I go to the right all the way at 100, then I've got a fuzzy edged picture frame. So I usually leave the feather, the roundness, and midpoint at 0. And then I just move the amount slider, generally negative, somewhere again between -15 and -10 and -30. That's a range I kind of like. So again, on a photo like this, a vignette will help in this bright lower left corner and a little bit of the bright spot in the top right. If I use a vignette and I just pull it in towards the left, darken those up a little bit, then my corners are darker. It keeps more attention in the center of the photo. I like the look. I know it's a bit of a special effect, and I try to keep it so that it's not super obvious. But I do like it. It's just kind of a style thing that I like. Again, we can just turn off the vignette so we can see what it looks like without it. I'll turn off vignette. The corners will get darker. My general rule of thumb is I don't want it to feel like there's a vignette. And you only really notice it when you turn it off. That's kind of my policy with vignetting. So that's vignetting, the first control here. Keep it simple. Basically just use the amount slider. That's my preference. And way I work, just go negative for dark, positive for bright. But again, I'm not a fan of the bright white vignettes. So next up is the grain slider. Grain is very much like noise. It's adding a bit of visible texture to your photo that simulates film grain from the traditional photography world. So digital photos can be very clean. You'll notice the background here doesn't really have any grain or texture to it. So if I want some grain, I can add some. If I want a little bit of texture, a little less smoothness. To get to here, all I did was just click once, and that'll zoom into the image. If you want to zoom more, you can do Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, and then hold down the plus sign. That'll zoom you in. To zoom back out is Command minus or Control minus on a PC. So the grain, let's turn that up and see what happens. So we should see some texture start to happen in this area. Yeah, there it is. So now it's not just smooth, it's got some small chunks in here. I can add some size to that so it becomes more visible, and some roughness so it's less smooth. Let it do its work for a moment. There we go. So very much now it's noisy. So if I zoom back out, we should still see that. So it feels, again, this is another stylistic possible way to use this. The photo is not as sharp. I'm going to turn the effects off so we can see before. Sharp and smooth. If I turn the grain back on, you'll see with these settings, you get a photo that's not as sharp, feels a little older, like maybe it came up from a film camera. Some people like that. I tend to not use grain. I don't think I've ever really used it, to be honest. But if you do like just a little bit of less digital perfection in your images, maybe turn the grain up a little bit and leave the size and roughness at their default values, just so you get a little bit of texture. So we'll zoom in here. See, we've got just a little bit of grain going on here. Not a lot, but just adds a little extra lack of super smoothness that digital photos can sometimes have, and maybe lack just a little bit of soul. Yeah, so that's the grain slider, really grain effects. Again, it's not something I use, but it's there. Now here's one place where you might use it. If you have a photo that's got a lot of ISO noise in it already, it's already grainy, textured, lack of detail, that might be a good place to use it. So we'll do that in a moment on the next photo after I show you noise reduction. So let's do noise reduction first, and we'll come back here to grain. So let's go to noise reduction, and then I'll come back to add some grain. So the noise reduction is in the detail panel in the develop module. It has two components to it. It has a sharpening component and then the noise reduction itself, and then the noise reduction itself is split into two parts. We do get a preview zoomed in at 100% up here at the top of the noise reduction. So we'll see that in a moment. So let's come down here into noise reduction, but let's go to the photo that really needs it, which is this one. So this photo was shot as taken at 25,600 ISO, the maximum for this camera. So we'll zoom in and we'll take a look at the noise. And zooming in, going to about a 1-to-1 view, is the best way to deal with noise, because it's hard to see what the noise is doing when you're zoomed out. So noise has two components to it. It has a color part and the luminance, which is the exposure part. So that's where the color part is the red, green, and blue bits that you're seeing here in this picture of my office. I usually start with color, and I turn it up, and I try and get the color noise to go away. So I'm trying to reduce the color noise, the speckles of color. So that's pretty good. The color noise has gone away, but one of the things you have to be careful with the noise reduction sliders is that you don't turn them up so high that you create what's called artifacts. You create a new kind of noise. You change it from kind of semi-organic looking to more digital looking. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. So the noise reduction, how much do you turn it up? You turn it up just enough so that the color goes away. So as little as you can get away with, and that the color noise still goes away. So let's see what that's going to take on this image. So on this one, I'm down at about 16 or 20 to get rid of the color noise. That looks pretty good. I've still got lots of speckles, lots of loss of detail. That's what noise is loss of detail, loss of image quality. So I'm going to take the luminous part of the noise and turn that up till the noise kind of gets better. It's on this image, it's not going to be great because there's so much noise. But I can make it better. I can make it look less the first thing you see. In this photo, turning it up to about 30 makes it better. If I zoom back out, that helps. I'm going to turn off really quickly the detail panel so you can see before. So even when it's zoomed out like this, you can see the noise, especially in this shadow wall, this darker wall. Turn the noise reduction on that we've applied, and it'll look better. So it's smoother. Why do we take photos like this? Why do we turn the ISO up so high even though we're going to have the noise? Here's why. The reason we do that is so we can get our shutter speeds to a faster, shorter duration so that we have less potential camera shake into the image. We can't fix camera shake, blurry photos from that, but we can reduce noise in our photos. So let's zoom back in. A couple more things to be aware of with noise. Noise will tend to be most prominent in the mid-dark shadow. So in this image, it'll be right here along this wall. And as you can see, we've still got some color in here that I don't have on the gray part of the wall. And if I try and get rid of that, this is something you have to be careful of with noise reduction. So I'm going to crank this up and see if I can get that to go away. And we'll just turn it up and wait for it to do the math. And there's still some color, and now I've noise. I got rid of most of the color noise, but now I've got some weird other stuff kind of starting to happen, and I'll really start to see it if I turn the luminance noise reduction up. So now it's just these blocky, smushy, really weird, degraded. The image quality is just terrible now. I've lost all detail in the chair. It's just this smushy, again, squiggly. It's called compression artifacts, so when you try and get rid of them even more, it makes it worse. So basically what you have to do with noise reduction is to keep it low enough so that you've just reduced it enough. And basically what I do is I keep my noise reduction controls, both luminance and color amounts, somewhere between 20 and 40. I hardly ever go above 40. The other thing I deal with in the noise reduction is I don't deal with the detail and contrast and the detail and smoothness. I don't really see that much of a change. Maybe it's just the Fuji camera I'm using, so I pretty much just leave that alone. Sharpening, again, I just leave that at the defaults. I find it works really well for my photos. You can experiment with that. Every camera, because of the way their sensor data is interpreted by Lightroom, will benefit from different amounts of sharpening. For me, the default works pretty well. So let's go back down really quickly to grain and finish that conversation. So this photo with the noise reduction still has some noise, and because the ISO because the ISO was so high, I've still got some noise, and the noise looks a little more digital than analog, so it's a little more, I guess, irritating to most people. It is to me. So by maybe adding some grain to this image, by putting an overlay of more noise, yes, I'm adding a defect. I can hide the digitalness of the original defect. That's my goal anyway. We'll see if it works. So because the ISO was so high, the image isn't going to be very sharp. The image isn't going to have lots and lots of detail, especially when you zoom in like this. So you can hide some of the digital noise, those squiggles of versus the the general roundness of grain noise by adding some grain. So I did that a little bit. We'll see if it works. We'll zoom back out. That's okay. That works. I hardly ever use the grain, to be honest. Sometimes if I have a photo that has a lot of noise in it, I'll add just a little bit of grain to make it feel more like organic grain, more like film grain, especially because at very high ISO values, some cameras will their ISO noise becomes more squiggly, that's my word, more digital looking than organic looking. So that is our look at vignetting, making our corners a little darker in our images to create a bit of a spotlight in the middle. Create attention, keep the attention in the middle, keep it very subtle. Also here we talked about grain, an effect, a special effect to add some noise type elements that's like film grain in the film photography days. It takes away some of the digital smoothness and perfection in images if you like that. And then lastly, we talked here about noise reduction in your photos, reducing the appearance of the digital noise that gets introduced with cameras at higher ISO values on their sensors. So I hope that was helpful. As always, if you have questions, please leave them below. I look forward to continuing this series of videos on the map to Lightroom. So until we meet again.